We love Zencaster because it allows us to record the audio for our podcast and create the video segments we use for our weekly Sister Scoop episodes. Zencaster has helped us make content capture simple.
It's now super easy to record a podcast with Zencaster. Log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. Record studio-quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests, and feel a sense of zen knowing Zencaster's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable.
If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencaster's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast in one place and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations.
Just go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code SistersAssembled, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.
Katie and I are always hungry, and one snack we both love is beef jerky. That's why we're so excited to tell you about one of our favorite jerky brands, Matt Hat Jerky.
Matt Hat's delicious taste makes it a great snack, and the variety of flavors, including original, black truffle, and my personal favorite, roasted garlic, means there's a flavor for everyone. Plus, it's local to the area where we grew up in, which we just love.
Use the link in the show notes below to get some Matt Hat Jerky for yourself, and make sure to use our coupon code SistersAssembled for 10% off. Hello and welcome to Sisters Assembled, your home for all things MCU or MCU adjacent. And if you've been listening to any of the news recently, I won't be saying MCU adjacent at all anymore because this is the last one of those.
Thank goodness.
I know, truly. But with that all being said, this means that we are covering our reactions to Kraven the Hunter, which has not 100% been confirmed, but sounds like it will be the last film in the Sony Spider-Man universe. We'll get into what that might mean because it actually has a little bit of an implication when you think about this film. So, with all that being said, I'm going to kick it over to Katie. She's going to give her initial reactions to Kraven, and we'll go from there.
I actually want to really quick add on to that because Kraven actually did something to us I don't think we realized at the time fully, unless you were keeping up with the news, but there was not a single end credit to that movie.
Yep.
And I think that says what it needs to say. Personally.
Yeah.
Anyway, going right into reactions. I actually like this one, guys. I know that sounds shocking coming out of my mouth. Now, granted, is a big portion of why I like it probably because of Aaron Taylor Johnson? Yeah. I'm not going to sit here and lie to anybody and be like, no, it's because the plot was the best plot of any movie ever. No, it was probably because it was Aaron Taylor Johnson on my screen doing all sorts of stuff, shirtless half the time. Like, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be completely honest about that fact. But I enjoyed it as a whole. I went in with a couple pieces of knowledge, a couple pieces of feedback from people who have seen it, critics, all that stuff. I understand some of the complaints that were coming out. Do I think it was the best thing I've ever watched in my life? Absolutely not. But I would not pay to go watch it again, but I'd actually on my free time, like watch it when it comes on some sort of streaming. So I think that says something.
Honestly, I think the reason I liked it, because I genuinely enjoyed it as well. Like, I was sitting there in the theater and I was like, I'm actually like, I like this film. And I was like, halfway through, I was like, am I really going to go into the episode and say that I liked Kraven the Hunter? And yes, does it help that the actor is absolutely gorgeous and truly embodied the physicality? I'm going to say it in a really professional manner. Embodied the physicality of Kraven the Hunter very well? Yes. But I think truly from an analytical perspective, the actual strength of this film is that they did so little to tie it to comic books and the Marvel, like, comic book precedents. Like, obviously you had Kraven the Hunter, you had Rhino, but the way that they did it was to set it up more as, like, an assassin espionage type film using Marvel IP with a little dash of, like, mystical or things like that, like things that are obviously outside of like your normal realm of possibility. But I think that the fact that they didn't try so hard to shoehorn it in with Spider-Man and other pieces that they have done in the Sony Spider-Man universe and allowed it to be its own film actually gave it a lot of credit, because you can watch it as a standalone film and be like, actually, this tells a pretty decent story. I don't hate it. I can actually get behind this.
I think that's the point right there, is that it can stand alone. And I'm not going to sit here and say some of these other ones couldn't have necessarily stood alone if you didn't know what you were getting into. Like, I'm going to be honest, in comparison to some of the other characters, I mean, Morbius not counted, but Venom, for example, like, obviously we all know Venom. Most people know Venom. I obviously know Venom because we grew up watching the Spider-Man cartoon, and he obviously was in that. And then we saw the Tobey Maguire, and he was in that. So Venom is more familiar. And so I think regardless of whatever is going to happen, everybody knows that's Venom. In Kraven, obviously I know Kraven the Hunter. He also was in that cartoon, but not to the same degree. And so I'm like sitting here, and I was very far removed, to your point, from the actual comic book story of it. I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm just enjoying this. I'm along for the ride. There were ups and downs still. There were, and we'll get into them. But as a movie as a whole, I was enjoying it. I thought it told the story it wanted to tell, and it didn't push itself to be, hey, this is Kraven the Hunter. This is going to be a problem for Spider-Man. This is going to be XYZ. I just was like, if you know nothing about Kraven, this is just like a random movie. And you're like, cool. And that is how I went about it. I just was like, I'm going to pretend. And I think having that little bit of ignorance of like not overanalyzing it for the most part allowed me to enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go and you look at the film as a loose interpretation of these characters that were developed in the comics, there you go. Like, because I think even Kraven, like, he's a villain in the comics, right? But they took this villain, they made him a good guy, and they also they kept a lot of the same powers, and even the way that he gets the powers, we didn't think that they were going to keep it the same. They adjusted it, but they kept it relatively the same as what is done in the comics, yet it worked in this film, and they were able to take that basis but remove it and twist it far enough that I don't want to say it's like a caricature of Kraven, because that's not the right word.
No, it was actually like a fan fiction.
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And it made it so much better because Sony can't pull off a actual comic book based film. They can't do it. They've shown us 5 times that okay, the Venom ones are okay. Venom aside, they've shown us at least twice with Morbius and Madam Web that when they go very deep into the comic and try to make a comic book film, they cannot do it successfully.
Yeah.
This is the first time that they said, this is a loose interpretation, a fanfic, if you will. What would happen if Kraven the Hunter was your male main character and you wanted to make him morally gray and kind of the good guy? And that is actually kind of what it is. If you enjoy that type of thing, which I love that kind of thing, that's why I enjoyed the film, because they did, like, again, it's like they didn't try that hard to make it this serious comic book thing. And I think that's actually the strength of it, because if you're looking at it as a serious comic book thing, it's just not there.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm able to say I like relatively enjoyed it, because I took the step back and I just was like, I'm not gonna overanalyze this, and I'm also just gonna accept it for what it is. And for what it is essentially a fan fiction, being written in its own vein, and I'm fine with that. That is fine. You didn't make a mistake casting Aaron Taylor Johnson, and I'm not gonna sit back and say you made a mistake, casting Jared Leto or Dakota Johnson or any of these people. But the thing is I said this in the predictions. Aaron Taylor Johnson has done this crap before, and he's known for his action movies. This wasn't a comic book story. This was an action movie. That is what that was. And he just did what he does best, and he goes into the action movie and he gives us action, and that's what I asked for, right? That's the simplicity of all of this. So I think it was smart who you put as your leading man. I have to say, I thought the family, the father, and I'm so sorry, I will admit, guys, you know how I am with names. And for the longest time, I was like, who's Sergey? And who's, like, I literally was like, who's who?
Let me give you a little rundown. Nikolai is the dad.
Okay.
Sergey is Kraven.
Sergey.
Yeah, I was gonna like subtly try to help you out so you didn't keep saying
It's
Sergey,
fine.
but you pointed it out, so that's fine. Anyway, Sergey is Kraven, and Dimitri is the little brother, aka Chameleon.
Okay, it was the brothers that kept throwing me off for the longest time, because he would just be calling their names. Like, their dad would just be calling names, and I was like, who is answering? Because they would both turn around, and I'm like, okay. Regardless, I thought you had a good top 3 right there in the family itself. I mean, you have the dad who's Russell Crowe. Come on, like, great actor. Aaron Taylor Johnson, great actor. And then I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but the guy who plays his brother, who plays Dimitri, was just in Gladiator 2. He's one of the twins, one of the emperors. He's up and coming. I'm sure he's been in other things, but I know him from that. So you have a very solid, like, leading three people right there. And maybe the script wasn't perfect across the board, but like, the story was told. They all played their parts very well, and I was invested.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I think that centering the film too around the family was really smart, because I think one of the things that, really surprised me toward the beginning of the film was how much time they spent in the flashbacks. I was kind of surprised. We had probably a 15 or 20-minute sequence where he was just a young kid, or we probably saw him grow up by a year or two, in those last little bits in what became his home in Siberia. But it was very interesting to me that we spent so much time kind of laying that foundation, because I think we all kind of assumed it would be a few minute background scene or flashback scene where we would kind of get the synopsis of the relationship with the dad, the relationship with the brother, and then we spent so much time. And it was actually kind of indicative of the center of the film. While you talked about it being, an action film, at the end of the day, it's also a film about the Kravinoff family. And so I think, to your point, centering around those three guys, but then also having narratively it around the family and how every single thing that happens to him, as Kraven, to the brother, the brother's evolution, the father, how he shaped those boys for probably worse or maybe a little bit better if you think of him as trying to be the antithesis of his father. All of that is shaped in those 20 minutes, and that kind of set the tone then for the rest of the story.
I also think the flashback worked because honestly, when we hit the flashback initially, which we knew was in it, you see it from the trailers, you kind of sit back and you're like, okay, here we go. But then we sat in it, and I also have to commend the two boys who played the younger versions of them, because they played them very well. And I was invested in this. You could have had those two boys playing the younger version and this be like a prequel almost to the Kraven story. And I still think I would have watched it, because it was very interesting to see the dynamic and kind of see, to what you were saying, how their father pushed them in the direction that he pushed them, and how one stayed and one left, and just the differences that they became, because that difference is what drives their entire relationship and story and drives this entire movie. One left and obviously became a hunter and became what he became, more than just obviously growing up. There were some other aspects to him and what he became. But then the other one who stayed was really quite weak in comparison. And he didn't hold much. Now, granted, he also is considered, not like, it's his son, but not the mother's son. So he really counted Sergei as his main son, even though he obviously cared for Dmitri, but it wasn't to the same level.
Well, it's the idea of like succession, right? Sergei's the legitimate son.
Yeah.
I'm using air quotes. You guys can't see them, but I'm using air quotes for the legitimate son, and then, Dimitri's the illegitimate son because he's not from a union between Nikolai and his wife. He's from, an extramarital affair. So it's very much like, they talk a lot about legacy and dynasty in the film. And so Sergei's his legitimate heir to his dynasty. And Dimitri's like, you're cute and I like you, but you're not the official heir because of, the way that you were, or with whom you were conceived, I guess.
Yeah. That being said, that the flashback worked so well because it already set that into motion, and you see these characters live this the entire rest of the film. So I did enjoy that. I thought that was really well done. I will say the whole aspect with their mother was one of my complaints, because I just feel like that was never fleshed out. Like, they're talking about it, and honestly, if they would have just left it at the fact she died, I would have been like, oh, whatever. That drives enough of a plot. That drives enough of somebody's emotions. I get it. But the fact that they were kind of trying to dance around the fact that she had more to her story, their dad seemingly put her in what I was assuming was some sort of a mental hospital, and she took her life there. And there was more to that. Like, there was more anger to that, and there was more feelings that I just don't feel like they actually gave the time to. So I kind of just wish they would have just avoided trying to give her a backstory, because it just didn't work. But It was there. That was one of my complaints, though. Either way, it still drove them a lot, and also just how their dad was, how Nikolai was. Russell Crowe did a great job, my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, he played like the gangster dad who is only worried about, again, like that idea of like, what legacy are you leaving? And like, that is so much of what drives Kraven too, because he wants to have the opposite legacy. Like, that line that is very prominent in the trailers of like, my father puts evil in the world and I take it out. Like, he's trying to be, the other side of the coin. And then what's interesting is watching Dimitri get stuck in the middle of that, right? And like understand you're the same as dad, but different. But I'm actually the same as dad because even though he viewed me as weak and did not take me seriously, he was still grooming me. Like at the end of the day, who took over the empire? It wasn't the legitimate, quote unquote, legitimate son. It wasn't the son that Nikolai would have chosen. It was the one who sat there and watched from the shadows his whole life, for better or worse.
Yeah, you pointed out perfectly. They told the story from the perspective of the family, and it worked that way. But I want to get into some more of the specifics. Well, actually, I want to say one more thing, and then we'll get into more of the specifics. I enjoyed they made this R-rated, and it was worth being R-rated. And I'm very, very happy they went that direction. It deserved to be bloody. It deserved to be gruesome. I don't normally do... I should say I'm only a fan of gore when it's well done. This was well done.
Yeah.
I was never... The only time I was like, oh, was when he literally ate the guy's face.
Yeah, when he took his nose off. I was like, oh! And that was in the trailer, too, so I knew it was coming, and I was like, I'm good.
That was one of the only moments where I was like, oh, okay. For the most part, though, it was done... I mean, that was tasteful, too. I'm not sitting there, but that was the only moment for me. Otherwise, it's tasteful. All of it was tastefully done, and it was worth it. It was the type of movie that I expected gore, and it should have been that way. And it worked. It worked so well for the movie. That's what I mean. Like, take it out of it being a Sony, Marvel, whatever it is. Take it out of being a comic book story. And I'm like, I just, for the most part, enjoyed this. We'll get into my biggest complaint as we go about some more of the details, but it was well done for the most part.
I agree.
Well, let's just get into my biggest complaint.
I'm curious what it is because I know what mine is, but
I would think we might have the same one. I'll be actually shocked if it's not because I won't know what yours is then. But what are you doing with the rhino? What was that entire point?
Oh no, we do have different ones then. You do have different ones. Yeah.
We do? Oh my god. Okay, well first let's just talk about the rhino. First off, what? Like I was following, and we obviously knew he was in it from the trailer. I'm not really sure what showed up on the screen though when he went full rhino transformation, but I I don't even really have words. The CGI was not it in that moment. I understand the rhino is kind of complicated because in some iterations and in most iterations, it's a very large man in a rhino suit. In other iterations, it is somebody who transforms completely. Obviously, in the only other live action iteration, it was essentially a robot suit and that the guy was in and controlling. I get it. He's kind of a weird character, but you've done weirder. I mean, you had like multiple robots. You have the Hulk that, I mean, obviously Sony doesn't do the Hulk, but like you've done the Hulk. You're doing a Red Hulk. You've done She-Hulk. Like you can do this stuff with CGI and it's not always perfect. Don't get me wrong, but like what happened here? And there was just a lot of frustration when he went full rhino because I just was like, oh my god, this is just bad. And then on the other hand, I'm so angry because once again they wasted the rhino. This is the second time Sony has sat here and wasted the rhino as a character. It's frustrating.
Okay, I'm taking that all in. Okay, so here's my thing. Definitely better than the Paul Giamatti Amazing Spider-Man 2 version. Granted, we only saw that for like 2 seconds, but still, like that was just what was that? So we're stepping up. I liked that they went transformation for this one.
I agree. I think it should have been that way.
I didn't honestly hate the way it looked. Like now that you're talking about it, I'm like, yeah, it kind of did look like he got crapped on by a bunch of birds a little bit. Or that, you know how like when you're gonna die that I'm using this as an analogy, but like, you know how like when you're on the beach and you're like covering yourself up with like semi-wet sand and you're like doing that? That's kind of how he looked, but like painted gray. At the moment, I was like, you know what? I can get behind this because it is unfortunately, like, the best version of the Rhino that we've seen. And I liked the story that they gave him in this film because I was like, I like that, like, it was connected to the Kravinoffs. It's what spurred him on, right? It's what motivated him. And then he was transformed by this doctor, right? Okay, that to me was cohesive. It was a legitimate motivation, and it actually gave the villain, like, a real story, like, versus him just being a mwahahaha villain. Like, that's dumb and nobody likes that.
Or the exact same version of the hero, just the antithesis of them, which has been their, like, MO.
Exactly. So up until that point, I was like, cool, great. So that's why I'm not as critical about the Rhino. Like, could the CGI have been better? Sure. But, like, there were a lot of visual issues. That is my biggest qualm with this film. What were they doing with people's mouths? What were they doing with people's mouths? There were times where the mouth and the words, like in Madam Web, we pointed this out, the mouth and the words were not aligned.
Wait, I didn't notice that.
You know what? There were pieces too, and, like, I don't know, maybe I need new glasses, but I swear there were times where it was giving Cavill removing the mustache with CGI in the Justice League reshoots, where the mouth looked like, no, you know what it looked like? What's that ad where it's like a sun and then it's just like a person's mouth? It was giving that. And I was like, what is going on? Why is this happening?
I have to say I didn't notice that much, which is shocking because I was the one who really went ham on that in Madam Web because I was like, what is happening?
I'm pretty sure the first time I noticed it was when he was speaking Russian to the guy that he assassinated at the beginning of the film. And I was like, I don't feel like the words that are coming or the shape of your mouth is matching the shape. And, like, I don't speak Russian, so, like, that, I don't think it was that though, because even the way his mouth was moving was, like, not really conducive to, like, the sounds that his mouth should have been making. And so it, like, put me on a high alert. And then I feel like there were other instances throughout the film where I was like, the mouth does not match the words. I'm confused.
Yeah, I have to honestly say I didn't notice it that much. Maybe I'd notice it more now. Well, also you pointed out, so maybe I'd notice it on, like, a second watch eventually. But I didn't notice that. Unless I did, but I didn't think about it too much. Though, to be fair, when he was also speaking Russian, I wasn't watching his mouth because I was reading the bottom of the screen. So I probably wasn't really paying attention in those moments because I was actively trying to read what he was saying.
Perks of being a second language major in college, you can do both.
I mean, I still read it faster than he was saying it, so it's not like I wasn't looking up, but I guess I just really didn't think about it that much. I will say to what you were saying really quick about the Rhino, though, I didn't mind the story. That was fine. I was fine with everything leading up into the final battle, per se. It was the final battle that I was like, oh, because also he, like, didn't get big. And I think that was weird for me. I was like, why is he still tiny, though? Like, he's just, like, I get the whole point was, oh, now he has bulletproof skin and all this whatever. He can...
Well, he did get a little bigger.
But not the way I would have thought the Rhino should be. Like, I thought he was going to get big. And so then I just felt weird about it. I also, they kept too many of his human features. Like, why were his ears just there?
Oh, I didn't notice that. I didn't notice
Oh
the
my
ears.
God. Oh my God. Why did he still have human ears? Like,
Did they forget to CGI his ears?
I don't know what they were doing, but personally, he just shouldn't have had ears to begin with, so I'm not really sure why he did. Like, those should have gone away. It was weird. It was really weird, and I was a little disappointed because I thought it could have gone a lot better, and then not to mention, then they sat there and, again, didn't use this character to his fullest potential, in my opinion, so I was like, okay. The whole dubbing or not dubbing or whatever happened with the things not matching up, didn't notice, but it would be something I would have to look into the next time I'd watch this movie whenever it comes out.
Yeah, or just, like, I kind of want to know, and I didn't get a chance to do that between, like seeing the film and recording this reaction, but I would love to know if, like, other people also noticed it, because I remember when we were doing Madam Web, that was something that everyone was talking about, was, like, the mismatch between the timing of the mouth movements and the actual sounds, like words coming out of people's mouths. I am so curious, and I'll have to look up after we finish recording, and, like, maybe we'll include it in our, like, show notes or something. or a tweet or something afterwards, but I am so curious if other people were also like noticing it, because it was like there were a few times where I almost started giggling because I was like, what is happening, and why can't they make the words match the mouths? Like, Sony, what are you doing in post?
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of wish I would have noticed, just because then I could have referenced it, but I don't actually know what, like, I didn't see it. But I will point out too, something I want to talk about really briefly is a big complaint that I saw people had beyond the rhino being a mess was the huge amount of characters it was introducing. I have to say, I thought it could have been worse. I saw that review or that piece of feedback prior to going into the movie, so I was really nervous. I was like, oh God, here we go. I'm thinking it's Madam Web all over again. But honestly, like, I didn't think it was that poorly done, because let's go back. His brother is Chameleon. We talked about that in the predictions. Obviously, by the end of the movie, that's what they set up. They literally set him up to be him. Whether we ever see that, I guess I don't know.
Never coming to fruition.
But we knew that was kind of a thing. Then you have Calypso. I didn't think she was really, like, I wasn't bothered by her intro. I thought she played her part the way she needed to play it. Like, she didn't feel, like, I didn't feel bogged down by her story.
No, it flowed really seamlessly, and she was a really good supporting character. Also, side note, Ariana DeBose, great actress, great job on this role. Like, I don't think she was phoning it in. I liked her. I liked the tension between the two of them. I liked that I don't know in the comics whether, I think they don't meet until they're adults. Like, I don't think she gives him the potion as children in the comics. I'm pretty sure they're like, full grown adults. But I liked that they met as children. Met is a kind of loose term there because he was half dead, but that they met as children and then were able to reconnect as adults. I actually thought that added like an interesting level of depth to their relationship.
Yeah, I thought that worked really well. And so I didn't feel like she was a whole other character that I have to learn, Like, I was fine with it. Then you had Rhino. Worked for me for the most part. Again, as a villain, worked. I thought his introduction worked. They did very well with the flashback, like I said. I think where you get I can understand a little bit of the complaint comes in with the foreigner, because what was that? Like, why was he even there? I didn't really understand that.
Yeah, it was kind of overkill.
Well, and it just didn't really make sense, because if the rhino was going to end up doing it all pretty much himself anyway, why was he there? I guess my thing was, it would have made sense if the rhino never really was involved until the very, very end, but he was involved the entire movie. So it didn't make sense to have him. I also was like, what is your ability? I could not understand his ability to save my life. He just started counting and then things happened. And I was like, okay, but like, what is going on here? And they never explain it either. They never talk about it. They just are like, he just does this. And I'm like, oh, I mean, sure, I guess.
So I didn't do any research on the foreigner prior to going to the film. I will own that as my weakness here. But my understanding is that, like, when he's counting, he's essentially freezing time. So it's making it seem like he works or moves really fast. That's how he was able to, like, get guns from people or literally kill them in the 3 seconds that he's essentially stopping time.
That's what I kind of was getting by the end of the film, but I still was like, that's very weak to never explain that.
Yeah.
And even when he's talking to the rhino, like, that could have been the moment.
When he's talking about his mentor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then the other thing was, I was like, oh, he killed my mentor. And then I thought they were going to, like, name drop someone kind of iconic.
Same!
And then they didn't. And so then I was like, okay, so I really don't care. This is stupid.
Yeah.
Like, at least the rhino's motivation, I got it. But I was like, your motivation's dumb.
Yeah, well, it's very shallow. And not in the sense that, like, having a relationship with someone is shallow, but, like, there should have been more to it. And to your point, like, I was expecting him to say, like, this is a bad example. It's, like, the only assassin I can think of at the moment, or, like, person in that realm. But, like, my mentor was Nick Fury, but, like, someone of that level where, like, the name would have come out and I would have been like, oh my gosh, like, that's so exciting. And, like, now I get it. And that's cool. Like, you took out someone, and I'm not saying that, like, losing someone who's close to you isn't meaningful. Of course it is, but, like, we've seen that in villains before, right? You need something new and different. And if it's a iconic character, at least it gives it something to help differentiate from, oh, you killed my this, you killed my that, which is like every other villain's origin, essentially.
Right. And because he already wasn't really the main villain, it just was like, all right, I guess. It didn't do anything for me. And then he died. And I guess it's just hard too, because it's like, it actually, is perfectly the equivalent of the villain in Iron Man 3.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's the same story.
Yes, but it's the perfect equivalent because you sit there and you're like, I don't care because like you took this personally and they don't even know you.
Yeah.
And Craven's sitting there and is like, dude, I don't know you. But also at the end of the day, in Craven's story, we know he's killing bad people. So I don't feel bad because I'm like, he killed him for a reason.
Yeah.
Like there's a reason he went after him. So I'm not feeling any sort of anything for you. I'm sorry. Like clearly your mentor was a bad guy.
Agreed. Yeah. No, 100%. And like I said, if he was going to be a bad guy, he should have been like a bad guy with a recognizable name. Because then at least you would have gotten that little hit of dopamine of like, I know that name. Like the Leo DiCaprio meme where you're like, oh, I know that, you know? Or I understood that reference. Like, give me something to care. Like, give me a reason to care. And you didn't. Like, you had an opportunity and you were just like, I'm not going to say a name.
Yeah, it just fell really flat. And honestly, other than the small and very short fight scene where he poisoned him and then he is like beating him up, which also was just like trippy as all heck. Take him out of the story and there's really not much there for me. He really doesn't do anything. It's like one-sided beef. And I'm like, okay, there are quite a few villains who have one-sided beef, but like it's extremely one-sided that it just was embarrassing. It was really just embarrassing. His entire life it was devoted to finding Kraven and trying to go after him. And I was like, really? That's what you did? That is how you used your time. Also, this is a dumb complaint, but I complained about it during the movie too. I hate the fact that he like devotes his whole life and okay, whatever. If you know you're not going to beat somebody using just blunt force, going, you know, fist to fist, whatever, I get having to think outside the box and do other things. I just was kind of annoyed because I was like, the only reason you're even landing blows on him right now is because you had to poison him and he's hallucinating. Like, I know that's so stupid, but I literally was sitting there and I was like,
yeah,
dude, you know, you had no chance against Kraven if you hadn't done that.
I do want to point out, though, one thing that I loved about the hallucination or the poison that made him hallucinate was the use of the spiders, because I think something that we talked about in the predictions was that in the comics, his mother's cell or room, I guess is a nicer way to put it, is infested with spiders. So he has trauma related to that, which is part of the reason that, you know, he's so obsessed with Spider-Man. And obviously in the absence of Spider-Man, which again is a strength of the film, not because Tom Holland would have been bad, but because it would have weighed it down and like not allowed it to be the solo film or standalone that it was. But I love that they gave that very subtle nod that like if you know enough about the character's history in the comics, you're like, I see it. I see the spiders. Like I understand why he feels that way. It's a little nod to Spider-Man that, you know, it's never going to come to fruition. But if you're a like fan who's going to, you know, be a fan of the comics as well, and that's the background you come with, or you're doing research prior to the film like us, it's cool to see that like they added that little Easter egg, because for a lot of people it's just like, oh, he's afraid of spiders. Like, so are a lot of people. Like, it's common fear, but there's like a real reason behind that. So I did, when those came out, I was like terrifying, but also I really, really loved the subtle but yet well placed Easter egg.
Honestly, that was one of the few moments in the movie where I was like, I cannot look at this. I was like,
I thought of you immediately.
No, I was like, I need to just not at this exact moment. And you know what? That's fine. But no, I thought it was a great nod. And even if it wasn't a nod to that as itself, him being a Spider-Man villain, that is the nod it needs to be regardless. So I think it kind of did things in twofold, and I really did enjoy it. But yeah, I just thought it was kind of annoying because I was like, dude, you know he'd lay you out if you weren't poisoning him. And I think that's why I was just like, that's stupid. But as a whole, it worked. I think Aaron Taylor Johnson, again, I mean, I don't think we focused enough on him, but he did great. And I really enjoyed him as Kraven. I do kind of wish they would have, okay, maybe some of this is because of Pietro, but I do kind of wish they would have had him keep his accent because obviously, I mean, Kraven has an accent.
Yeah.
I was a little annoyed because I don't know if they were dubbing and maybe that is why the mouth was off. I don't know if you noticed it was only during the Russian parts. I don't know, but
it wasn't. No, it was when people were speaking English too.
Okay,
don't worry.
So then maybe not. But because he speaks Russian and he was speaking it very well and he had a very good accent going, at least from an American point of view. I've never been to Russia. Like, I don't really know. But to me, it sounded really good. So I kind of wish, and I know he can do it because we've seen him do it as Pietro. So I just kind of was like, oh, I do kind of wish he didn't just pull out an American accent. Also, I love Aaron Taylor Johnson, but my guy was fighting that English accent. Like,
Yeah, he was.
constant battle the entire movie to not sound English, and he was losing. And it just was not working for him. But I do kind of wish they would have had him keep the Russian accent, especially because you had Russell Crowe have the accent. So I was like, oh, I wish you would have actually had both boys keep it. I think it would have worked better. And especially for Kraven, especially because then he grew, and I understand, like, after the fact too, he grew up isolated in Siberia and stuff. But like, come on. Like, I was a little aggravated by that.
I did think it was interesting that they spent a ton of time emphasizing that he lived in America and went to school in America as the reason why he did not have the accent.
But I just sit there and I'm like, why? Because honestly, again, Aaron Taylor Johnson is English. Like, he has an English accent. So you're not even having an American actor who can't do a Russian accent.
Or at least Eastern European, yeah.
Yeah. But like, so why can't we do that here? I was like, oh, that was kind of annoying, actually. As soon as he stopped speaking Russian at the beginning and he went into his, like, just his voice, I was like, oh, what are we doing? Why is he American?
I was very confused by that, and I was like, is this gonna be a film? Because this is how in high regard I regard Sony's movies. But I was like, is this gonna be one of those films where he picks and chooses when he has the accent? Because
oh, you mean all of Wanda Maximoff in the entirety of her time in Marvel?
Yes,
yeah.
Because I was like, I will lose it if he just decides to turn it on and off throughout this film willy-nilly for no, like, if you're doing it and in terms of like an espionage or something like that because you're trying to disguise yourself, fine, I am all for it if it has a narrative reason. But if you're just doing it because you took some takes with it and some takes without it and you're editing it together and you're like, I don't care if he has an accent or not, I can't do it. So I do, this is so bad that I'm commending them on this, but I do commend that they picked a non-accent for Americans. They picked a non-accent and they stuck with it. And they didn't like vacillate between like him having different accents. At least they like picked a lane, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's totally fair. I do just wish the lane they picked had been more of the Russian accent, again, that he's proven he can do and Kraven has. Otherwise, again, Aaron looked amazing. He looked the part. He played the part well. Was the CGI always great? No. There were weird times that I was like, why are you using a green screen right now?
Yes! And it was so obvious.
It was very obvious, and it just hurt me a little bit, but it's fine. He, as a leading man, though, did his job. I enjoyed it enough to be able to say that, and I'm like, well, I'll watch it just for the sake of watching Kraven the Hunter be out here ripping people's noses off and, like, murdering them gruesomely. I'll do it. That's fine. It's not ever going to be the best thing ever. But the irony of all this is we can't even talk about where we think it plays into things because it doesn't seem like anything's happening after this.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is such interesting timing to let slip or leak or however you want to put it that you're not going to be continuing this universe as your final film is releasing, because anybody who may have felt like, I may not want to see this film, but I'm going to see it because it may open doors, was immediately like, oh, so I don't need to see this film. Like, this is my permission to be like, I'm not going to the theater now. I'll wait until it's on whatever streaming service is going to be on. Because it did set up a sequel. Like, let's talk about that. Like, that final scene between, well, I guess it wasn't quite the final scene of the film, but that final scene between him and his brother, where the brother is fully confirming, like, I am, because, you know, he was dealing with his own issues of insecurity based on the way his father was treating him his whole life, but he's what he thinks is coming into his own, taking over the empire and essentially becoming someone who belongs on Sergei's list. It sets them up as antagonists against one another for a second film. And then that fight, what is the final scene of the film, where Kraven sits on the throne and he's, you know, in the vest and all of that, that is meant to be like his official suit up. Like, I have stepped into the role of Kraven the Hunter. I no longer even really have a family the way that I once did. My father's dead because I murdered him. That was a whole thing. And also now my brother belongs on my list. Like, I am fully embracing this Kraven character. It is a subtle setup. And now we know it's going nowhere.
I don't even think you could say it was subtle. Like, it was set up. I think it's strange to do that if you already knew there were talks. Because come on, there had to be.
Though, to be fair, to be fair, this film was pushed back so many times. When they filmed
No,
it,
and that's
they
fair.
might not have
But
known.
think about the fact that, like, how far in advance these things get planned. They're telling me as you were still filming this movie, they weren't having any talks about the next one, the next anything. So you're setting this stuff up, and like, but there's literally not a single meeting that's sitting there right now going, hey, so what are we doing next? Even if there's nothing happening, like no production, nothing, no, just like the literal first conversation of, so what's after Kraven? None of those conversations are being had.
Well, to give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, those conversations may well have been being had. I mean, we talked about this in the predictions episode, like there was an El Muerto film at one point that, kind of fell off the face of the earth. We don't know whether or not they were even in pre-production very quietly at the very early stages, and it was things like the Madam Web absolute panning earlier this year that really just dragged them through the mud as a studio. Or even the recent, I wouldn't call Venom 3 a failure, but in terms of how it performed against the previous two, it was not a knock out of the park home run hit by any means. So they've had two, I think both films they took losses on this year related to this. And maybe this was just the final straw when they started seeing what the previews were. I mean, to get a 12 to 15 million, I think that was the range, opening weekend for this film, which was doing worse than some films in their second, third, fourth week being out, like, the writing is on the wall. Like, you're gonna make that decision then, regardless of what may have been in the early stages of production, because you've had what has become a truly, and now the weekend's still going on, but you've had a truly terrible year in terms of you released 3 films and you're looking at 3 potential losses.
I mean, I hear ya. I think regardless, we're not seeing a sequel, it sounds like. I guess you say they count their losses, I'll count it too. There's nothing more to say, in my opinion, about it. Because, like, I'm not going to sit here and talk about a sequel that I'm essentially being told is likely never going to happen.
Exactly. I mean, it's definitely interesting because, again, like we talked about, at the end of this, or when we were doing the predictions, at the end of this, will we see a Sinister Six? Is there going to be something that truly makes all of these film experiences worth it, or that they were culminating to something? And now we have the answer, and that's no.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks because there were opportunities, but it was Sony, so I guess, really, are we shocked? I don't know. Either way, Kraven as a whole, not the worst movie ever put out. I can enjoy it. I actually walked out and did enjoy it. I enjoyed watching it. I didn't put too much thought into it, though, so maybe that helps.
Go in with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I was like, I'm just watching this like I watch any other actor who I obsess over. I just go and see their movies. That's what I did. I saw Aaron Taylor Johnson's newest movie, and that's it.
Yeah. And on that note, we are done covering Kraven because there's gonna be no breakout episodes. So we're done covering Kraven, and crazy enough to say, but we're likely done covering Marvel adjacent films and the Sony Spider-Man universe. So hope you've enjoyed our sassy little barbs, because now we're going back to straight up MCU coverage after this. With that all wrapping up, you can follow us as we pivot back to the MCU on your podcast platform of choice. Check out the website. It's got the calendar, like we always say. And if you are enjoying the show, you can also support it via our Buy Me a Coffee, which is linked below in the show notes.
You guys can also give us a follow on all of our socials, which are linked below. And we are going to be going right into What If predictions. So those will be coming out next week already, because What If is right around the corner. So get ready for that. We're very excited for what's going to be the final season of that show, which is unfortunate, and there's no reason for it, but whatever, they're ending it. So get ready for that. We are super, super, super excited. And until then, Marvel just blew your mind, so let's talk about it.